sich nur als imposant.
Hi everyone, welcome to WION Live broadcast from New York City. I'm Susan Tehrani. First, let's get you up to speed with this hour's headlines. President Joe Biden and former President Donald Trump poised to win enough delegates to clinch their respective parties' nominations, formally kicking off the first U.S. presidential election rematch in nearly 7 decades. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, along with delegates from more than 30 nations, witnessed the tri-service exercise in Pokhran, showcasing India's indigenous weapon systems. China, Russia, and Iran have started a joint naval exercise near the Gulf of Oman, which are aimed at strengthening ties and cooperation between the naval forces of the 3 countries. Ukraine pounds targets in Russia with dozens of drones and rockets in an attack that inflicted serious damage on a major oil refinery. Qatar, which is mediating talks, says that Israel and Hamas are not close to a deal on a cessation of hostilities in Gaza and releasing hostages. Haiti's Prime Minister Ariel Henry agrees to resign following weeks of mounting pressure and increasing violence in the impoverished country. And controversy in Formula One continue to go hand in hand. Felipe Massa takes the legal route in a bid to be crowned 2008 world champion. The long drawn-out war between Israel and Hamas might create a possible problem for Israel in the long run. This, according to U.S.'s Threat Annual Report. U.S. intelligence has warned that Israel will be challenged by Hamas for years. This, as the Israeli military continues with its operations aimed at destroying the militant group after the gruesome October 7th attacks. According to the report, the risk of escalation of the conflict in Gaza, now stretching into its 6th month, also remains high. Israel's actions are also being increasingly scrutinized as the death toll in the Gaza Strip continues to rise. Hamas officials put it at over 30,000 deaths. Questions now are being asked whether the U.S. is changing its tone towards Israel or not. The relationship between President Biden and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has grown increasingly fraught. The U.S. president says that he hasn't scheduled a meeting with Netanyahu. Biden also says he does not have any plans at the moment to address the Israeli parliament.
Have you scheduled the Come to Jesus meeting with Bibi Netanyahu?
No.
Do you plan to, sir?
We'll see what happens.
This comes after Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu vows to press ahead with an offensive on Rafah, the southern city of Gaza. a move U.S. President Joe Biden has described as his red line, where 1.3 million Palestinians are taking shelter. Moreover, the Gaza Strip is facing a humanitarian catastrophe. A charity ship that has been docked in Cyprus for close to a month finally set sail, taking almost 200 tons of aid in a pilot project to open a new sea route for aid to a population on the brink of famine. The boat is towing a barge containing flour, rice, and protein, as well as water and medicine, provisions that are desperately needed in the besieged coastal strip. The 2010 nautical mile journey that's 210 nautical mile journey. It usually takes about 15 hours, but officials said that heavy tow barge could make the trip considerably longer. They say the total duration for the journey could be in the region of 50 hours. All right. For more on this, we are being joined by retired Colonel Rich Outson from Washington, D.C. He is a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council as the Jamestown Foundation. Rich, great to see you again, and thank you for joining us on WION. How will the war between Israel and Hamas impact Israel's relationship with the U.S., considering increasing scrutiny of Israel's actions and the potential change in tone from the United States towards Israel?
Well, it's good to be with you, Susan. This is the most tension I've seen in this bilateral relationship as long as I've been watching Middle East politics, and that's several decades now. I think you have a broad bipartisan support for Israel's security that's still solid. There's also the emergence of something we haven't seen before, though, which is a very critical anti-Zionist and to some extent anti-Israel progressive wing in the Democratic Party. And as the party has moved further to the left under President Biden and a little bit away from that sort of bipartisan consensus in the center, you're hearing sharper and sharper criticism. There's been strains in Israel that derive from this, such as when Benny Gantz, an opposition leader, but also a member of the security cabinet, came to visit, and that was not approved by Prime Minister Netanyahu. So there are a lot of strains showing, and I think there's still support in Washington for Israel to do what it can to make sure Hamas does no longer constitute a threat after the war, but it becomes murkier and murkier, as this intelligence report indicates, about how that's going to play out and how long the suffering of the civilian population in Gaza has to be balanced against that.
Rich, what are the implications of Israel's planned offensive on Rafah? President Biden has described it as a quote unquote red line. I mean, that's an issue of its own. We remember former President Barack Obama, he put a red line for Assad in Syria. He didn't really come through with that. And a lot of talk has been made of really putting a red line on others if the United States is not willing to do something serious. Was it wise for the president to use that term?
I don't think so. The history of the Biden administration and before him, the Obama administration, in which he was vice president, on issuing red lines and then not observing them is established. The other thing is that there's just, look, when you talk about a red line, there has to be a consideration of how you enforce red lines. And in most cases, in most countries, that means economic sanctions or military coercive power, diplomatic sanctions, that sort of thing, none of which the Biden administration is in a position to use against Israel. So it's a bit of a flight of rhetoric trying to underline the fact that he thinks it's a really bad idea. Now, you asked about implications. Rafah is different than the rest of the Gaza Strip in that it's the main connection to Egypt. So there have been for decades now bigger, deeper smuggling tunnels under Rafah than you would find, for instance, in the northern or the central parts of the Gaza Strip. There's tunnels there used by Hamas fighters to get back and forth in the Strip and also to reach out and try to attack into Israel. But the tunnel network and structure in Rafah is much deeper and much more developed. So there'll be a lot more fighting. And the other thing is you've got half the Strip's population packed down in there. The Israeli government has said, well, we need to move these people to the west or to the central part of the Gaza Strip prior. But again, this is already a population that's sort of on the brink of real hunger and perhaps even famine by some accounts. So the time that it would take for those military operations is going to put even further strain. I don't know that there's anything President Biden can do, given the restraints on what Congress will allow and the United States public in terms of real pressure on Israel. And so the question is, does Netanyahu listen to him at all or just continue on the path he's already laid out?
Yeah, so true. Colonel, thank you so much for joining us on WION. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. Rich, I look forward to speaking to you again very soon as we follow this story very closely.
Thank you.
U.S. President Joe Biden and former President Donald Trump are poised to win enough delegates to clinch their respective parties' nominations. 4 states are holding elections today with an outcome which, well, is all but predetermined. With this, the U.S. will formally kick off its first presidential election rematch in nearly 70 years. As of Monday, Trump needed 139 additional delegates to reach the 1,215 required to secure the Republican presidential nomination. There are 161 delegates at stake in Georgia, Hawaii, Mississippi, and Washington state. Biden was 113 delegates shy of the 1,968 needed to clinch the Democratic nomination. Tuesday's contest will allocate 254 additional delegates. Trump's last remaining rival for the Republican nomination, former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley, ended her presidential campaign after Super Tuesday last week. Trump won 14 of 15 state contests last week. Biden, meanwhile, has faced only token opposition in the Democratic primary campaign. Both rivals have already turned their attention to the November general election. In Georgia, Donald Trump once again repeated his claim that the 2020 elections were fraudulent. He also attacked Biden for failing to stem the flow of illegal migrants at the U.S. southern border. Take a listen.
These are stupid people. I'd like to use a more sophisticated word, but, you know, there are some words that just go, these are stupid people. Joe Biden should not be shouting angrily at America. America should be shouting angrily at Joe Biden.
The 81-year-old Biden, meanwhile, is repeatedly warning that Donald Trump poses a danger to U.S. democracy. He is also criticizing the former president's heated rhetoric about illegal migrants. The Biden campaign launched a more aggressive phase last week, announcing that Biden would tour several battleground states. The last repeat presidential match took place in 1956. At that time, Republican President Dwight Eisenhower defeated Democrat rival Adlai Stevenson for the second time. This year, voters have expressed little enthusiasm for a repeat of the battle of 2020. Polls show both Biden and Trump are unpopular with the majority of voters. Service has accused the U.S. President Joe Biden's administration of attempting to meddle in Russia's upcoming presidential election. Without offering evidence, the intelligence service says the Biden administration is using NGOs to affect voter turnout. And according to the agency, the U.S. is trying to undermine the election results by dissuading voters from going to the polls. The warning comes in the lead up to Russia's presidential election that will be held from March 15th to March 17th. This year's election will see a remote online voting system for the first time in the polls. The election results will be announced shortly afterwards. And in May, the winner will be inaugurated as president of the country. Voting will also take place in what Russia calls its new territories. These are parts of Ukraine now controlled by Russian forces that have been placed under Russian law.
It's a big honor for me. I've been waiting for this a long time.
During his 24 year in power, Russian President Vladimir Putin has kept a tight hold on Russia's political system. If successful, Putin will be winning another 6-year term, cementing his place in power until 2030. Challenging the Russian president in these elections are Nikolai Kharitonov of the Communist Party, Leonid Slutsky of the Nationalist Liberal Democratic Party, and Vladislav Davankov of the New People Party, who will aim to avoid Putin from seeking a 5th term in office. All right, here in the United States, a 15-year-old boy armed with a bladed garden tool has been fatally shot by the sheriff's deputy in California. The boy was shot when he charged at the officer who was responding to a 911 call about domestic disturbance in Apple Valley. The distressing body cam video shows the moment 15-year-old Ryan Gaynor ran out of his family's home brandishing a bladed gardening tool towards the officer. The deputy then points his gun, backpedals, and yells at the boy to get back. The sheriff's department stressed that the boy attacked the deputy without provocation, but after Gaynor allegedly ignored the deputy's commands, the lawman opened fire and struck the teen. The 15-year-old boy was administered first aid and taken to a local hospital where he died from his injuries.
Hey, get back! Get back! You're gonna stop!
A retired Boeing employee, John Barnett, who turned into a whistleblower against the aircraft maker, was found dead in the United States. Barnett was a whistleblower and had voiced concern over Boeing's production standards. And according to the Charleston County coroner's statement, the statement was given to the media on Monday. Barnett was found dead from a self-inflicted wound in his vehicle at a hotel parking lot in South Carolina. Barnett retired from Boeing in 2017 due to health reasons after 32 years of service. Last week, Barnett was questioned by Boeing's lawyers and was scheduled to appear again on March 9th, but did not show up. Eventually, he was found dead in his car. Boeing's spokesperson told WION, "We are saddened by Barnett's passing, and our thoughts are with his family and friends." In the latest incident, at least 50 passengers were injured when a Boeing 787 operated by LATAM Airlines experienced an unexpected drop. The South American airline is currently investigating the reason for the aircraft's tremors, which sent 10 passengers and 3 flight attendants to the hospital. This adds to the growing list of Boeing's troubles. Boeing stock slumped and is now past 25% following the criminal investigation into airborne explosions of